everybody. Thank you so much for getting back so quickly. And our panel discussions are going to run in a particular way. We're going to give every panelist about 5 minutes to talk to the theme. And then I'm going to ask a number of questions so we can hear them answer these questions in different ways. And then we're going to open up to the floor. So we really want this to be a chance to kind of workshop difficult and wicked questions. So I just have to start by expressing my gratitude to the three of you for being here. We're very excited because our panel consists of a library director, the director for the Consortia in South Africa, and a publisher. So we really wanted to try and bring a panel together who can look at the question of the financial sustainability and the financial challenges of libraries from multiple different angles. So thank you, all three of you, for being here today. And it's lovely that you could be here in person, which is really nice. And so I am going to kick off by asking each of you to just chat for 5 minutes or so about what you think are the key issues around sustainability and the financing of libraries. So you'll see there are some microphones on the table. And perhaps we can start with you, Veronica. And if you just speak into the mic and then we'll go down the row. So we start with you, Veronica. Thanks.
Thanks very much for the invitation to be here. I think it's wonderful to have this kind of platform where librarians and the occasional publisher can have a conversation, because obviously we are very much partners in this knowledge economy, right? So perhaps just to take a step back, well, let's say 100 years back, when Wits University Press was established in 1922, the university had just come into being and they immediately established a press, obviously for the purposes of publishing research. So it was a new university, it needed a publisher, but also to act as a kind of credentializing role in this process. And when the press was formed, there was a publications committee consisting of academics. The librarian was only appointed 7 years later, and for a few years he was the de facto publisher at the press. But the press was based within the library, right? So from the very beginning, there's been this very close relationship between the scholarly publisher and the university library. And also, if we look back at the history, and we've been spending time looking into this, the issue of sustainability has been there absolutely from the beginning, right? So the university never had that much money, and so sustainability was imagined both from the sort of input and output side. So there were constant debates around funding for publication, which we still have, and of course now with open access that's become even more crucial. But there was also an attempt to have income through sales, and that also right from the beginning when conversations were held with University of Oxford and Cambridge presses. I'd say about 10 years ago we started doing digital publishing, and what we do now when we talk about sustainability, we talk about that together with value. So value is in a way the other side of the coin of sustainability. What finances do we need, but what value do we add to the whole project, right? We do mostly, just talking about sustainability, fitting in with this theme of a global knowledge economy, a lot of our income actually does come from international libraries and so on, using third-party platforms like EBSCO was mentioned, JSTOR, all of those. And in a way, the biggest challenge for us is the local South African market. How do we get our product into those South African libraries? Should we, as publishers, be working together much more closely? I mean, there's a lot of debate amongst libraries and consortia and consortial buying of content. The publishers, the university presses, I think it's mostly institutional challenges around working together where institutions compete with each other. But yeah, so I think just to add, before I hand over to the next speaker, I mean, I think one of the biggest risks we face is that we are just so small. And so for us to have a stronger voice in this, we really do need to work together and cooperate together.
Veronica, thank you so much. And one of the things that we are passionate about at UJ, and it's partly why we have the UJ Press, is the production and consumption of knowledge in the Global South. And I think when we have these conversations about sustainability, one of the things we really need to bring to the fore is the sustainability of our own knowledge production and consumption. And if we don't do that, we are going to be creating a whole series of other problems for ourselves. So thank you very much for raising those issues, because understanding who we are and sharing that information with the broader world is so important. We can't just keep getting information from the global north. And I loved what you said about the idea of value. I think value is exactly, as you say, the other side of sustainability. So let's hand over now to Dr. Mathew Moyo.
Thank you very much, Maria, and thank you for having me here. I'm so excited to be here in person at least. Thank you so much. And thank you for bringing up this topic or issue on sustainability and libraries. I was speaking to a forum last week also about budgets, and I said at times budgets are more like salaries. It may never be enough. It may be enough for some years, but for most of us, salaries are always not enough. So that's basically the case with our library budgets. So in preparation for this task, I looked at what makes our libraries sustainable. And I looked at a couple of things, one of which is the aspect of good governance. You need to have a clear vision. You need to have a vision that is understood by all the staff members that you are working with. You need to understand and have a clear mission. What business are we in? You need to have goals that will take you to your vision. You need to have smart objectives so that you can realize your vision. You need also to have clear policies to guide your operations. You need to have clear guidelines. And this is all about planning, which is much more critical than just your plans that you can have in place. You need to be accountable, you need to be responsible. Above all these values, you need to be resourceful so that you can be able to do more with less, just like you said earlier. You need to also embrace efficiency and effectiveness in your system, in whatever you do. We are saying sustainability is the business of everyone, just like quality. It is a business of everyone. It's all our business. You need to have clear milestones so that once you achieve, you are able to say, we have reached our goals, we have achieved our objectives. One other thing that I also looked at is that you need to have advocates within the system, people who can advocate for the library, people who can speak out there about the value addition of the library services. so that you can also secure the required financial support for all your services. I think in terms of what makes libraries sustainable, I'll pause here and pick it up later.
Thank you so much for that again. And as always, so Mathew and I know each other quite well. We've served on a board together. And one of the things that he always does is he always brings us back to the basics and the really important issues that we need to focus on. And in what you were saying, I think, you know, one of the things that possibly we should think about going forward is how we talk about the money that we spend. So I have started to say to the finance department, it's not that we spend this amount of money. It's because we spend this amount of money, we save the institution a much bigger amount of money. Imagine what it would look like if we hadn't bought these things for the institution and everybody tried to get these articles on their own. And so this idea of the value and the sustainability is so important. So over to you, Glenn.
Thank you, Maria. Right, so I'm just struck today. I heard on the news about, I think it's Libya, where they've had the most appalling floods, and they believe that at least 10,000 people are missing, let alone those who are dead already. And we've also heard about Morocco's earthquake and so on and so forth. And the devastation that they have and what they need to, how they need to pick up the pieces and start over. And it was the same for Japan at the end of World War II. And somehow in a few short years they became a superpower by very cleverly getting everybody to collaborate, to work out what really mattered, to share information. They have a concept called co-opetition, where they force all their industry to share information after a number of years. And they found ways of becoming one of the leaders in industry. Now, SANLiC is a wonderful example of collaboration. I really pray that there will be something like that in interlibrary loans. But in terms of getting together as libraries to purchase access to materials in what is now recognized as a very broken system. However, I did some maths on our subscriptions this year that went through SANLiC, and by purchasing together, we've saved across the consortium 90% of the cost of accessing materials. So you're only paying a tenth of the cost of the list price of the materials that you have access to. And if you're wondering what those figures are, we're spending 880 million rand, but it means that we're saving over 8 billion rand through collaboration. So I really recommend that you Google the future of scientific publishing by the International Science Council and read very carefully how they've articulated how broken the scholarly communication system is and how unfit for purpose it is. At the moment, research is both the supplier and the customer, but they supply their material for free. They hand over their copyright to publishers who then sell it back to you, so you become the customer of your own material. And yet taxpayers paid for the benefit of that knowledge to be produced and shared for the common good. And the International Science Council says that the universal access to the record of science for authors and readers should be without barriers to participation, in particular those based on the ability to pay, institutional privilege, language, or geography. So the entire system, there's international recognition that the system is broken and it's changing. We're now in a situation where more than 50% of all of the research output is available in open access. It's interesting that Africa and Latin America have a greater percentage of open access than other geographical areas. And funders are now pushing that they will not continue to fund material unless it becomes open access. But this disruption is very, very painful. So it is both a threat and an opportunity. And I think looking at sustainable budgets is asking how best do we collaborate and measure and think clearly on the way forward. And I really thought that Maria identified some very simple but very valuable points in her presentation that are worth mulling over in that respect. So I think perhaps that's my introductory remarks. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Glenn. And it's just amazing what we can do when we come together. Thank you so much for sharing those statistics. So what I'd like to do now is pose some questions and then ask the three of you from your different perspectives to respond to these questions. So the first of the questions that I have is, what are some of the critical external factors that you believe will impact on the sustainability of libraries and that we should factor into our budgeting and how we should be addressing our budgeting? So we're looking for what are the critical external factors that we think we should be factoring in to our library budgets. And I don't know which one of you would like to jump in and start answering the question. Glenn, you look as though you're ready to go there. So perhaps you should take the mic once again and let's hear what you have to say.
All right, thank you. I alluded to one of the critical factors, and that is the disruption in how research is communicated. And I think the most important thing to understand is, if you think of it from a business model point of view, how on earth, what happened was, after World War II, there were some very clever people involved in communication and, let's call it, propaganda, who worked out that researchers needed to communicate their research. And they said, you give your research over to us, your copyright, and we'll make sure everybody reads it. But unfortunately, I mean, where does the concept of an ivory tower come from? It's about who reads your research. So by getting into open access, we've noticed with one of our transformational agreements, Springer Nature produced some very nice reports. Before our researchers were publishing open access, only other subscribers to Springer Nature were able to read it. In the very short 6 months that we've had the Springer Nature deal, we've found that they've managed to increase that by nearly 3 to 4-fold in the space of 6 months. There are so many more people accessing South African research. Incidentally, most of that in China and the United States.
Yes.
So this whole disruption of the system is number one critical factor. The second and the most problematic for us is purchasing power parity. So unfortunately, 98 to 99% of what we purchase is in a foreign currency, and 80% of that is in the US dollar. And this year alone, we've lost 12% against the US dollar. So that's a tenth of our purchasing power disappeared in the space of 9 months of this year alone. So in the last 10 years, we've lost more than 50% of our purchasing power. So the idea that we need to pay the same price in a foreign currency as a global north country is absolutely ludicrous. And I think more and more of the academic world is realizing this. And I think it's going to come to a time where we need to say enough is enough. We're not paying that price anymore, because it's just not sustainable.
Right. I wonder, Veronica, if you don't want to come in, because you're on the, in some ways, a little bit on the other side as a publisher, and then we'll come to you, Mathew, as the kind of middle ground between the two. Yes.
Okay, so obviously I don't really have insight into university budgeting processes, but what Glenn says there is absolutely correct. So we find that now with our digital products, we distribute it, as I said, through these aggregator platforms. So any library in South Africa buying our content is paying, I guess, in US dollars for it, which seems crazy, but that is how we get the content out. Unless, of course, you go for the print book, which nobody really wants anymore, as far as libraries go. I mean, this is a conundrum for us because we can see with that digital dissemination just how usage increases, citations increase. We've started measuring the usage data, which of course now is quite easy. Well, it's easy to gather the data, to interpret it is a bit more difficult. But it is how, so last year I think we sold books in 34 countries, including South Africa. This is clearly an issue we need to address because it means that South African libraries, even if you offer a discount, they're paying high prices in dollars. But it is the way we get our books into the local system. Let me just say, as far as open access is concerned, most libraries have some funds towards this, and we have made use of them. Most of them are in the form of article processing charges, certainly at Wits, which doesn't really address the issue of books in the humanities. And the difference here, there is definitely a disciplinary issue where most of the publishing in the humanities and social sciences, which is what we do, is book publishing. And of course, book processing charges are just so extremely high. The cost of publishing books is so high. So this is a conundrum we face, really. We do about 10% of our publishing is open access. We are not primarily an open access publisher, mainly, the budgeting is the biggest hurdle there, really. And we would certainly want to make our content available to libraries in a competitive RAND price, like we have RAND pricing for our books in the bookshops, which is much cheaper than the international price. But how do we get that there? That's a conversation we need to have, right?
And I think a conversation that is very, just, as you're talking, Veronica, I just can think of ways in which we can do this. So I think it's definitely a conversation to have. Mathew, let's hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Maria. I would say the external factors are pretty much interlinked. He has spoken about disruption in the industry, in the sector. I think I can now focus on advances in IT, in technology. We are now talking about artificial intelligence in our libraries, whereby more and more of our libraries are embracing and delegating knowledge to machines. We have recently witnessed the growth in robotics and robots within our library spaces. This is all caused by these advances in technology. We can also talk about the shifting and changing higher education landscape. It has a direct impact on the way we operate as libraries. So we cannot just fold our hands. We need to keep up to date with what is happening in our environment, whether you are in a public library, a school library, or an academic library. You just need to keep up to date with what is happening in the broader picture.
Great, thank you. So talking about what is happening in the broader picture, I want to pick up on something that we have been saying in different ways, and that is the potential of sharing and resource sharing. So I wonder if the three of you could address the question, what potential of resource sharing do you see libraries being able to take up so that we become more sustainable? And possibly thinking here about resource sharing both within the academic environment and possibly also with public libraries. You've got the mic.
Yes, I have the
Go
mic.
for it, Mathew.
I can start. Yes, I think you got it right also when you answered the question earlier. about interlibrary loans and their potential to sustain libraries going forward. I come from an environment where we have 3 campuses, 2 in one province and the other one in Gauteng. These are about 300 kilometers apart. And every day there's a lot of movement in terms of resources being exchanged between campuses and among our 3 campuses. I'm resident, I think, about 100 kilometers from here, but we're not doing as much business with the universities that are closer to Potchefstroom, but rather we're doing business with our campus, which is about 200 kilometers away in Mahikeng. So it's quite possible for us to share resources with universities around us. All we need is really a strategic discussion as library directors, as you said earlier, so that we can develop some strategies on how best we can share resources so that we can sustain, we can serve our users better than the current way of doing things. So there's a lot that we can really do as libraries in Gauteng especially, and its environment. Previously, I worked in an environment that was quite networked. I think there are 4 university libraries in that region. They use one catalog. So they are able to tap into the collections of each of the 4 institutions. If one of the institutions does not have a resource, they can then easily tap into the resource of the other institution. And that document or whatever it is will be delivered to the need library. So there's great potential in resource sharing.
Thank you. Glenn, would you like to pick up on this conversation?
Yeah, just a few thoughts around that. The first that comes to mind is the cost of books are so exorbitant, but Knowledge Unlatched, for example, has a system where you can contribute money to them. They then pay for the books to be open access. So they finance the publishing of the books, and then the whole world can access those books. So one thing that South Africa could do straight away is collaborate on putting money into a kitty, identifying the most critical books, and paying for them to be open access so that everybody, including municipal libraries, can access those books. There are also plenty of resources that are already open access. So that there are 2 major things in your budget. The one is access to materials and the publishing of materials, and the other is staffing. And I think that there is potential for collaboration around staffing, training of staff to meet this disruptive challenge that's taking place. And in terms of publishing, I believe that we are in such a, we can't waste this beautiful crisis we have. We're in such a good position. India really became famous for call centers around the world because they could do it better and cheaper than anyone else in the world. Why can't we do publishing better than anyone else in the world? Because we can definitely do it cheaper. So why don't we? You know, I mean, I've got solar panels, German inverter made in China. Solar panels designed somewhere else, made in China. They've worked out how to do it cheaply. Why don't we become the publishing part of the world by collaborating and making sure that our publishing industry here, expands? Because as people understand open access more and more, they'll realize it doesn't matter where you publish, as long as people can access your content, and as long as your content is good quality content, as long as what you're publishing is adding to knowledge, then you're in business. So it is such a golden opportunity if we just wake up and invest in our own publishing industry.
Okay, Veronica, I think that sets us up beautifully to come to you.
Just a few comments from my side. I mean, open access, definitely, there's knowledge unlatched. There are things like JSTOR's Path to Open, which we're part of now. We're going to have to see how that goes. What we found is that the best way to get our product into libraries is to follow the supply chain. Certainly when we started, when we did our first open access books, there were issues around the cataloging of those books, for example. I think those have mostly been resolved now. And what is incredibly important in all of this simply is metadata. So the metadata is out there, whether somebody has the product in their library or not, it doesn't matter. If the metadata is there, as I understand it, it means that whether you use interlibrary loans or a similar mechanism, you'll be able to find it, right? So for publishers, the importance of metadata, keywords, you spoke about that earlier, those kinds of things. So, yeah, open access, there are initiatives. I know with the metadata with JSTOR, for example, it's also proving a bit more difficult, but absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. So from what you've been saying, one of the things that I'm picking up is there a question around the critical skills or competencies that we might need to be developing in libraries so that we can manage our budgets better? In other words, that we can use the resources we have to make them go further. So would any of you like to speak to this idea of the kind of competencies we might need to be developing in our libraries? Mathew, you've been chosen to answer first.
And I don't really mind. I think skills are at two levels. On the part of the human resources, the staff within the library department, and also the skills on the part of the users in terms of information literacy skills. For me, information literacy skills holds great potential in ensuring that our resources are fully utilized. Users have skills to navigate the environment. Users have skills to find, evaluate information for relevance. Because we have just a lot of information, some of which is freely available online. But the challenge is that most of our users do not possess proper information handling skills. So it takes a great effort from the library side to train and ensure that we empower our users to have those relevant skills. In terms of human resources, it is also critical getting into the artificial intelligence world to ensure that our staff members have the relevant skills to use the tools that are at our disposals within our libraries.
Right, Veronica or Glenn, who would like to go next? No, Veronica's giving it a miss. Glenn?
I've thought about this a lot, but I think that what I'm commenting on, I have to respectfully say I'm not from a library, so I don't have your perspective. But I believe that a lot of these things are universal to any industry or organization. And for me, the first critical skill is the skill of transparency, the ability to be brutally honest with yourselves and others. We often find cultures where mistakes one tries to hide mistakes rather than celebrate mistakes. And therefore you end up hiding the real measurements, the important measurements, and you can't manage anything unless you can measure it. And if you want to assess the value of a particular subscription that you have with a particular publisher or vendor, I'm afraid you cannot rely on their information, because a lot of their information is produced through artificial intelligence. And you know from your own Google searches and YouTube work, you'll find that the AI thinks what you want to hear and then presents it back to you. And so you've actually got to have your own data that you access and evaluate yourselves. And again, that probably links again to collaboration. That there are a lot of resources that you can share across the industry with other libraries, because we need to remember that all this money is coming from the same budget. And incidentally, Tabo was at the same table with me. He shared with me something last night where National Treasury is saying, guys, we're going to have to cut back because you haven't suggested how we can save enough money. We don't have enough tax coming in to cover our responsibilities. So we know that there are going to be budget cuts. And I think everybody's just like hoping it's going to go away. It's not. We are going to be in serious trouble unless we find ways of being creative. So I think measurement is critical to be able to manage the situation.
Super. I'm going to open now to the floor and ask if you have any questions that you would like to pose to the panel. So I know the mics are going to start roving. So if anybody has questions around the libraries, library budgets, and more broadly, how we find sustainable ways to do more with less.
We've got some nice goodies to give away.
Okay, right. So you're suggesting that anybody who asks a question should receive a goodie?
Yes.
Fabulous. Right. So raise your hand and then you will receive a goodie and a mic. Okay, so we're going to start with the gentleman here, and then the lady at the back, and then the gentleman with the cap. Fabulous, yes. Thank you. And if you can just give us your name and where you're from.
Greetings. My name is Tato Sekwele from here at UJ, the Faculty of Engineering and Built Environment. Mine is to say that with regards to the global south consumption of education, so libraries need to have a multidisciplinary approach into uncharted territories where new information can be extracted and develop robust mechanisms that are complementary to budgetary, particularly since we're transitioning from triple PFMA to PPB, Public Procurement Bill. So there needs to be synergies with those effects in how we are managing libraries and what is the budget looking like to expand on the monetary versus the fiscal expansion. So I think with those two mechanisms, there needs to find signage so that we bridge the gap between budget depletion versus being resourceful with the allocated budget so that libraries can find expression into other systems that will be complementary to already existing structure. So that speaks to the decolonization of systems that are complementary to community engagement, to scientific research, and the open access that will enable a vast stream that will enable Global South to come up with new knowledge systems that will enable libraries to have a budget that is moderate versus what is currently happening with the transition of the Public Procurement Bill and other robust financial mechanisms. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's take the second question. And if we can just try and keep our questions short.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Rachel. I'm from Wits University. Okay, my question is about sustainability, ranking and competition within our academic libraries. What is its effect? How can we have sustainability but we still have competition amongst the academic libraries specific in South Africa?
Great, thank you. Super question. Right, and then the gentleman with the cap at the back.
Thank you, Prof. Mine is very going to be controversial, but I hope it will be of help, because when we talk of budgeting and sustainability of libraries, we tend to focus more on how do we make that our libraries are up to standard when coming to use of ICT devices to make sure that users get quality information service. But we tend to forget one important factor, which is the human resource, who are going to be more, to make sure that those resources, ICT devices, are more effective. When we talk about this budgeting, this will go to the directors in the libraries. Do we also go extra miles of talking to people who we are requesting budget for, to talk about how can we make our colleagues, our library staff, our junior staff happy by injecting more monetary value to their pockets? Because you remember, for us to remain relevant with our ICT devices, AI, we still need the happiness of the human resource.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you. Right, so happy human resources. I'm going to take these 3 questions and then we'll do another round of questions. Okay, so over to the panel to answer whatever you feel you would like to from those questions. I'm not sure who wants to go first. Perhaps Mathew, if we can put you on the hot seat first.
Okay, I can give it a go. The first, I think I can take it just as a comment and not necessarily a question. Then Rachel, I think you spoke about sustainability in the face of ranking competition. I think as libraries we need to locate ourselves in terms of what our role is in enhancing ranking of our institutions. I don't believe that we are here to compete against each other, but we are here to pursue the core business of the institution and support it so that the institution can excel at the national level and also at the international level. We have most of our universities aspiring to be in the top 10 within the country and aspiring to be possibly, can I say, in the top 300 to 500. I know that's where we have universities in terms of global ranking. We have our universities, some of our universities within the top 500. And if you look at South Africa, it's not a lot of those universities that are currently within the top 500. So we want to ask ourselves as libraries, how can we contribute to global ranking in terms of our own institutions? And I think we can just leave it there rather than ourselves competing against each other. The other question, the controversial one, I take it that it's all about incentives, it's all about motivation. How can we motivate our staff so that they can aspire to do better in the face of the shifting and changing LIS landscape?
All right. I wasn't clear what whether there was a question in the first issue around consumption in the global south. So I can't answer that. I'm sorry, unless there's a specific question there. Is there a question that you?
Glenn, I think
Okay.
let's take it as a comment.
All right.
If there's
Okay.
any- yeah.
So then, in terms of I love the question about competition versus sustainability. I think that's a fantastic one. And again, I'd like to use the example of Japan. I I believe that the government made some rules in industry where they said, you guys go and compete as an industry, but after 5 or 10 years, we want you to make all your intellectual property available for everybody else in the country. And so there was like a reset every 5 or 10 years where everyone could learn from the technology of each other to then go and compete again. And I'd like to really ask a question. If all this money is coming from a central budget, why on earth are we cutting off our noses to spite our faces? Because yes, your institution must compete, but what is your role as a library? Why would a library want to compete with another library rather than collaborate with another library? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. The purpose of the exercise is to make South African research relevant and available, and we need to collaborate to make that possible. And then in terms of happy human resources, I think that, my comment there is when there's such scarcity, it is very difficult to look after human resources, and I think all our institutions are really, really stretched. And I know that's hugely challenging, but I think, again, I think the question is, how do we best equip and train people to deal with adopting new skills and adopting a changing environment in a way that's both rewarding and sustainable from a human point of view as well.
Okay, I'm just going to take the position as being the chair of the conversation, and I do just want to jump into the question of rankings, because I think this is a very important but sticky question. So part of the ranking process is that your library and the resources in your library play a role in your ranking, just as your library and your resources play a role in whether your qualification is accredited. And so if you have a library that has a really brilliant body of knowledge, you go up in the rankings. And what we need to do as librarians, and I think as academics as well, is we need to speak back to this ranking system. Why are we taking a ranking system developed somewhere else and forcing ourselves into a particular box to the detriment of our own students and our own population? We have limited resources, and we should be ranked on how we share those resources. So if 5 universities share the same resources, well, fabulous, they all have great resources. Compete from that level of equality and of giving students the best and what the students need, and then fight about your ranking from there. But we need to change this ranking conversation as well. Okay, let's go for another round of questions, unless you had something burning, Veronica. Yes.
Not burning, and maybe it's slightly off the topic in a way. But I wanted to talk about why do we, and it was in response also to the question of competition versus sustainability. I mean, presses should not be competing with each other, but why should they not? They should not compete with each other because I mentioned earlier we're so small, but what we do, and somebody mentioned the word decolonization, we make research available that is produced here. We make content available in different languages. There's diversity of language. People talk about bibliodiversity also. We cannot only be looking at bringing in content from overseas. So I just wanted to make that point in relation to that.
Thank you. I think that was burning and important. Thank you. Right, we're going to take one question from the floor because the hand was up earlier, and then we're going to take any questions from our online audience. And at the last count, our online audience was over 160 people. So we have a lot of people following, and thank you to everybody who's joining us online. Okay, so the one question, the lady with the glasses, yes, Elise?
Thank you. I have 2 questions. The first question is, or I want your thoughts on how important do you think is
keeping statistics to make decisions regarding the acquiring of sources and planning, resource sharing, so it's statistics. And then the second question is, what are your thoughts on publishing or sharing via social platforms such as ResearchGate, Semantic Scholar, etc.?
Okay, so Elisa's been a bit cheeky and asked 2 questions, but we'll just let it slide. And online, do we have any questions online? Sorry, do we have questions online?
Thank you. Okay, Gab Mash says we need university press to intensify the agenda of ensuring that our libraries are well resourced with local materials, including indigenous languages. That was a comment. And then the next one is from the same person. Budget cuts are extremely affecting libraries negatively. Indeed, we need advocates. An advocacy campaign can well be started in all kinds of libraries. Okay, I'm not going to take ones that are not relevant to the session. Maybe the right time is now to have a national catalog shared by all kinds of libraries to maximize resource sharing. The catalog will be accessible by smart devices. Okay, that's it online. Thank you.
Super. Okay, so I think we can take one more question from the floor, and I think there was a question over here somewhere. So we haven't been to this side of the room yet. Yes, there we go.
Thank you. My question is that as we are focusing more on academic libraries, we know that public libraries also are under-resourced, and then there's a challenge with budget. So with that, my question is that as academic libraries, how can we assist public libraries to be sustainable, especially in resource sharing? Because I heard that the panelists were really talking about resource sharing amongst university libraries. Thank you.
Good. Great. So over to the panel. If anybody would like to start answering some of these questions. So we've got questions about stats. Glenn, go for it. You like statistics.
Yeah. I think to answer your question about statistics, I have to add the caveat that I'm not a librarian and I'm not from a library. So my perspective is limited by that. But from where I'm sitting, I think the answer is it depends on what you're measuring and who's providing those statistics and how you unpack those statistics. And it depends on what you are procuring that resource for. So you know, you've got to dig deeper. Is all I can comment on that. There was a question about sharing and ResearchGate. I found a very useful resource called the COKI, or Curtin Open Knowledge Initiative, from the Curtin University, where they show by institution and by country what the open access story is and what's being shared by publishers as open access, what is being shared on institutional repositories as open access or other repositories, and what is being shared on both. And you won't believe it, that a lot of South Africa's material is being shared on other universities in the world. You can find more content on other universities of our material than on our own institutional repositories in certain cases. And that's worth a look at. So I think that sharing is critical, and that might again be an area of collaboration. There were, in terms of a national catalogue, I mean, that sounds very exciting. I don't know enough about it to comment. And then in terms of public libraries, I'll stress again that more than 50% of the research material is out there, but it may not be in a format that is useful for the user of a public library, unless they're doing academic research. And I hope someone else can answer how that can be made relevant to broader society.
Mathew or Veronica?
Thank you so much. I'll also start with the question that focused on the importance of keeping statistics in our libraries. I think this is quite critical. Our decisions, our planning should be informed by data, the data that we generate within our libraries. So data analytics is quite critical. I can share that I'm part of a task team within the CHELSA environment, working on the improvement of the CHELSA statistical database, because to us as a sector, it's quite critical for us to maintain statistics, whether it's for benchmarking purposes or for decision-making purposes within our libraries. I always find it difficult to address a question from some administrators when they ask us as librarians, why do you undertake in research? And I always tell them that our services that we provide should ideally be responding to the data that we have. So the kind of researches that we conduct is informed by the data that we keep, and it's data that is emanating from statistics. So any decision that we take should be justified by the data that we have emanating from statistics. Sharing on social media, I think you addressed that earlier, very important. If you want to be visible out there, then you want to be on those platforms where the majority of your users are, and this is in most cases social media. University Press to diversify, I think she will agree, because then local is leke, as they say it, and I don't need to get deeper into that. I'm sure she will address that. Then how can we assist public libraries to be sustainable? I think this is all about collaboration. If you go to the developed world, America, university catalogs are actually merged with public library catalogs. So if you search, at times you do not even know that you are searching from a public library or from a university library. That's how they collaborate. And we also aspire to get there, given that Glenn is constantly reminding us that we are tapping our budgets from the same source. So we aspire to get to a situation whereby all public libraries within our communities, our school libraries, will have access to the same catalog as the university, so that whatever resources we have can be shareable. At times we occupy the majority of our spaces with books that are not being utilized. And yet there's somebody from our communities just next door here who may actually use such resources if they were exposed to those books. So I think it's not an option going forward. I participated in the development of the information literacy, the information access policy for South Africa. And those are the kind of issues that we were talking about, to say university libraries are closed to local communities. How can you open your university boundaries to your local communities? So it's really a scenario that we aspire to achieve, whereby we see that interconnectedness, whereby we will see collaborative endeavors between public librarians and university librarians. There was yet another question, I think, about catalogs being accessible through devices. I think in most cases, suppliers of library management systems, they already embed such tools, such that when you acquire that library management system, it already has provision for devices to navigate through that particular catalog.
Great. And we'll give you the last word, Veronica.
Well, I don't know about, but thanks for that. So just coming slightly obliquely again from a publishing perspective, I was saying we're also following a lot of data and statistics, especially since about 2020. So in 3 years, the citation data is still young. So we can measure where library holdings are. We can see what sales are like. So we use library holdings, sales, open access usage, if it's an open access title, and library holdings. And this is certainly for publishers incredibly important. And one of the things we don't really understand yet is how library holdings relate to the other data. And we see huge variations in library holdings amongst between different titles. So I think working with statistics and data, that's obviously something libraries do a lot of, and we're going to try and develop a model for doing that. But just to say, that would be a wonderful conversation to have with librarians going forward. As I say, we understand some of it, but certainly not everything yet. Yeah.
Great. In the interests of time, I'm very sorry, but we have to end our conversation because otherwise we're going to run desperately over. And our next speaker is going to be joining us from America, so we do really want to be aware of his time. So can we give a huge round of applause to our panelists?